I want to talk to you about horses. See, back in the late 1800s, in cities all over America, you were far more likely to find a horse, not a car, on a city street. And the average person needed a horse for their daily transportation. If you wanted to go somewhere and it was too far to walk, you depended on your horse. Horse-drawn carts brought goods into your city. In fact, the reason Dalmatians are so closely associated with firefighters was that Dalmatians and horses worked really well together. So Dalmatians would actually run in front of the horse-drawn fire apparatus to clear the path for the horses. Horses were useful. There were big businesses of oats, barley, hay, and straw, and feed stores were as ubiquitous as gas stations are today. And you had blacksmiths and farriers who made and installed the horseshoes for this critical transportation asset. But horses poop. In fact, in New York alone, 60,000 gallons of urine and 2.5 million pounds of manure were created every day. And it went right on the street. And when it rained, the horse dung became this disease-carrying slurry that seeped into basements, attracting rats and flies and other pestilent insects. This was a major public health crisis. And then one day, a green technology came along, the gasoline-powered car. Yeah. Now, at the last turn of the century, Alexander Winton was a bicycle maker, and he became obsessed with the idea of a bike that a rider wouldn't have to push and keep pushing. In 1896, he founded the Winton Motor Carriage Company, and by 1897, he was pumping out cars at the rate of just four cars per year. You see, people didn't like the idea of motor cars. They were used to their horses. They could get feed from anywhere, including the ground in the form of grass or hay if you were a farmer. A car required substantial investment, and you had to buy fuel, usually in cans from the blacksmith or the pharmacist. So it made sense why people wouldn't want to give up their horses. Why should a farmer who's made substantial investments in his horses, whose horses don't bother anybody, be forced to give up their horse for the public good? And I sympathize with the farmer. Why should their property be regulated because some idiot in New York City can't clean up their horse poop? Kind of see where I'm going with this? Now, firearms are a very useful tool. Humans don't really have claws or armor. We can't run particularly fast. It's the firearm that puts humans on the top of the food chain. And when it comes to something like self-defense, well, it's one of those things that all living creatures do. A bee will sting you if you present a threat. A bear will attack you if you threaten its cubs. Even plants release chemicals that defend themselves against insects. So, you could certainly say that a human being is no exception. Human beings have a right to defend themselves, and why wouldn't you want to use the most efficient tool possible? It is the firearm, not the restraining order, that puts a 105-pound woman on equal footing with a 6-foot-tall, 220-pound man who wants to do her harm. So firearms are useful, just like the horse was useful. But the problem is all the poop. And in this case, the poop is the criminal misuse of firearms. So I am a gun owner, and I can still carry a SIG P365 because, well, it's none of your business. In fact, it's my constitutional right to carry or not to carry a gun. You could even say it's my natural right to defend myself from threats, no different than a bee or a bear or a plant. But that being said, I'm not really a gun guy. I know a little bit about firearms from my time as an infantry instructor, but that doesn't really make me a gun guy any more than owning a car makes me a car guy. There's a great book called Getting to Yes, which is really a book about negotiation. And one of the big tenets of that book is to separate the people from the problem. Now, I don't do politics, but I can tell you this. The one thing that both pro and anti-gun people can agree on is that it would be nice if there was less criminal misuse or accidental mishandling of firearms. But back in the late 1800s, the better horse was the car. And today, the better gun might be something that can only be fired by its user. And believe it or not, there's a company that's making just this kind of gun.
A company called Biofire is working on this problem right now. They're in Colorado, which is where I am. So let's head over to their building and take a look at this new platform.
So the first thing you notice when you walk into Biofire is that this isn't a gun company, it's a technology startup. They get free food and drinks, they order lunch every day. This actually seems to be a pretty nice place to work. And a lot of the people who work here weren't hired from gun companies or even consumer products companies. They came from the defense industry. And there's a very simple reason why. People in the defense industry know how to make software code run very fast on rugged devices in austere conditions. If your iPhone doesn't unlock, it's not a life or death situation. But if your gun doesn't unlock, well, that's why you're watching this video, right? Now, I know there's a lot of people who are watching this who've already made up their mind about the technology of a personalized smart gun that can only be fired by its user. All I ask is that you keep an open mind on this. I'm a software developer by training. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, a master's in engineering management, which is kind of like an MBA for engineers, and an MSc in cybersecurity. I went to Biofire to tear apart their source code and technology in ways that the average gun tuber can't do. And it's solid. Their code works. But I'll get to that. Now, smart guns have a justifiably bad reputation. See, back in 2002, there was a group of lawmakers in the New Jersey State Legislature who had what I can only call a pathological devotion to technological ignorance. I mean, look at these people. You know, back in 2002, they were calling their daughter because they couldn't open their AOL email attachment of their grandkids. They pushed a bill through the New Jersey State Legislature which effectively regulated a product that didn't exist. The law was called the New Jersey Childproof Handgun Law, and it basically stated that once a personalized or biometrically unlockable firearm was available for sale, all handguns sold in New Jersey had to be smart guns. Law enforcement, of course, was exempted from this. Just goes to show you how much faith they had in the technology. Once this law was passed, New Jersey dumped $1.1 million of funding into my alma mater, the New Jersey Institute of Technology, to create this smart gun. And the technology still didn't work. So they dumped another $250,000 into it. All of this in an effort to create a product that didn't exist to match a law they had passed. It would be like New Jersey putting restrictions on time travel machines and then dumping money into time travel research in order to create the exact thing they were trying to regulate. And they did it with a straight face. Now, you might think that the law would have spurred a whole cottage industry of companies that would run after those juicy government subsidies. But gun companies wanted nothing to do with smart guns. Nobody wanted to put out a crappy product that didn't work, which would trigger the law. Software is hard. I write the stuff for a living. Between 50 and 80% of all software projects fail. And a smart gun is a software project. Why would a company take a risk on a product that was more likely to fail than succeed? So New Jersey's law had a chilling effect on innovation. Nobody wanted to be the first company to stick their neck out with this technology. Now, the law has since been supplanted by one that requires New Jersey gun dealers to simply display a smart gun, but the damage had been done. And the problem was that all of those old companies were thinking about smart gun technology the wrong way. Companies were taking regular guns and trying to retrofit them with smart gun technology. And this is where we come to positive instead of negative inhibition. Okay, so let me explain how a traditional striker-fired pistol works. So this gun is what we call in battery. The slide is forward, the cartridge is in the chamber, the gun is ready to fire. You get the firing pin, the striker, that is under tension by a spring. There is a physical block called a sear that prevents the firing pin from moving forward and firing the gun. Pulling the trigger drops the sear, which allows the firing pin to move forward and strike the primer of the bullet. The primer ignites the powder inside the gun, which creates a gas that propels the bullet out of the chamber. Typically in a handgun, the recoil impulse pushes the slide back, which recocks the sear, and the spent casing is ejected from the chamber. Then, as the slide moves forward again, another bullet is stripped from the magazine, placed in the chamber, and the gun is ready to fire again. But what if we threw all that away? What if we fired it electrically? Then the default condition is inoperable, and now the burden is on the electrical system to make the gun fire. Now we have a positive burden. So you start off with an inherently safe condition. The sear is locked closed, and then changing that condition electrically to drop the sear. So here's how the Biofire gun works, and this is not to scale, and it's basically a very high-level overview. The heart of the gun is an electrical fire control module. It's really a capacitor, and capacitors are essentially batteries that can be drained very quickly. The capacitor is activated by the trigger, but the trigger doesn't actually fire the gun. The capacitor does. The trigger is really just a switch that only activates the capacitor when the gun is safely armed. When the trigger is pulled fully to the rear and certain arming conditions are met, the capacitor discharges. The capacitor drops that sear and the gun fires. Now, here's what blew my mind about this platform. As soon as the capacitor fires, the gun's power cell immediately starts to recharge the capacitor. And this happens so fast that the capacitor is recharged before the slide fully moves back in battery. That's right. The gun is actually ready to fire again faster than the mechanical slide can get back into battery. This is the stuff of science fiction, but it's real. Now, I'm sure you've heard the term fly-by-wire. The F-16 has no physical cables. Everything is controlled by the flight control system. So the Biofire is essentially shoot-by-wire. There's really only three moving parts: the sear, the slide, and the striker. The trigger moves as well, but it's really just a switch. And if you're thinking that you wouldn't trust your life to any blank by-wire system, don't get into a modern car. Every single modern car has throttle by wire. And you've been driving that way since the 1990s and you probably didn't even notice it. So I've described how the gun fires, but how does it arm to begin the process of firing? In order to do that, I have to talk a little bit about the software. It's only going to take about 45 seconds, but it's highly technical. If you don't want to know about the software, skip to this time up here. Nerd! The gun is controlled by a complex system consisting of 14 circuit boards and multiple processors, which run microservices that were coded in the programming languages C or C++. C++ is used for things like the gun's cradle interface, where you need an object-oriented language for ease of development, and C is used for the gun's proprietary operating system and other services. The platform's proprietary OS runs multiple C++-based microservices, each of which controls a different component like user identification, activating lasers, or fire control. All of this is loaded onto NOR flash memory. NOR flash is much more reliable and much faster than consumer technologies like eMMC, but it's substantially less dense and a lot less expensive. In fact, the entire gun runs on just 2 gig of storage, and its diminutive size keeps the code tight and fast. If you skipped the software portion, welcome back and thanks for sticking with me. So let's talk about setting up the user. The model I used comes with a docking station that's also used to charge the platform's power cell. When you first purchase the gun, you add yourself as the owner. While you're setting it up, you can add other authorized users. You can even add temporary users that will expire if you want to take someone out to the range to try the gun.
And don't worry, a user can't add themselves without the original user's biometric permission. And speaking of biometrics,
the gun comes with 2 systems that can authenticate a user: a fingerprint reader and rear-facing infrared facial recognition. So yes, it'll even work at night. Setup is extremely fast. It took less than 1 minute. All the biometric data, your fingerprint and your face map, are stored encrypted on the gun inside of the gun's operating system. And once it goes in, there's no way of getting it back out unless you give it permission. The gun doesn't have Wi-Fi or GPS or RFID or any other wireless communication. It is totally self-contained. Now, when it comes to getting data into the gun, the dock and the smart gun communicate over a USB cable that is located in the dock. It's essentially a one-way system based on zero trust. That is, the gun never trusts anything, including the dock. And if you want to do an update, you have to unlock the gun through your face or by gripping the gun. Now, the dock does have Wi-Fi, so you can get software updates, but you don't need to turn it on, and it's not required for the gun to function. So now you're set up. How do you actually shoot it? Well, when you grip the gun will go through an arming process. This actually happens very fast, and the gun can be unlocked or armed with just the fingerprint reader, just the facial recognition camera, or some combination of the two. Typically, the fingerprint reader unlocks the gun in milliseconds while the facial recognition software is still building the face map and comparing it to what's in the platform's OS. If your hands are bloody or sweaty or you're wearing gloves, the camera will unlock the gun as you're getting into the low ready position. White means the gun is not armed. Green means the gun is armed and ready to fire. Now, quick note, you can change the colors on the gun to whatever you want. Some people like red to show armed, but you can make it purple if you feel like it. Now, the platform's fingerprint reader is only located on one side, and when you buy the gun, you can customize it for left or right-handed fires. It's not impossible to fire the gun with your non-dominant hand. It's just a little uncomfortable, and it can still be unlocked with your face. Now, one important thing that I really liked was that you could still unload the gun and rack the slide without the gun being armed. This is actually a pretty important safety feature because it allows someone who isn't an authorized user to safely unload the platform. So a police officer or medical personnel could still unload the platform without permission from the user and make the weapon safe. So how does it shoot? Well, you know what? So I'm not touching the thing. I do this, it turns green, and I am ready to go. Well, I'm actually pretty impressed. I mean, it shot just like a regular gun. There was no, can I have another 5 rounds?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
There was no pause or any
latency. Yeah.
There was no latency, I would say. It went boom every time I pulled the trigger.
Yep.
The lasers kind of freaked me out, but
Yep.
I've never been a big fan of the laser because when the laser goes on the target, then you're looking at the you're looking at the laser instead of trying to service the threat.
Yep.
But I'm also 47 years old, and so like to me, it's
plus 20 years in the Army.
These newfangled lasers, come on, darn it! I was actually impressed. Shoot by wire shoots like a mechanical gun. It is literally identical. And when I got a jam, I was able to do tap rack ready, just like on a mechanical gun, and I got back into the fight. When you put the gun back down on the table, it locks again, and it unlocks as soon as I pick it up. It's just like your cell phone. You didn't even have to think about it. I never once had to hold it to my face or give myself a moment's hesitation. It just worked. Now, the platform comes with a laser. I'm 47 years old. Lasers and red dots are weird to me, but it's an option you can turn off if you don't want it. Now, here's my final thoughts. I think Biofire has a platform that was built for a very specific use case, a home defense firearm for people with children. I have a brother who lives back in New Jersey, and he's wanted to buy a gun ever since March of 2020 because that was the first time he realized that the police are 30 minutes away from his house in the middle of nowhere. And 30 minutes is a long time to wait when someone is attacking you. But his wife won't let him buy a gun because he has 2 kids, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it's a legitimate fear. The Biofire platform effectively eliminates the concern of a child mishandling a firearm. Now, for someone like me, I live alone. I have a safe, I conceal carry. I guess you could say I could theoretically conceal carry this platform, but it's not going to be comfortable like my SIG. So I don't personally think this platform is for me. But the only use case I could see for me would be maybe if I got a second home and I wanted to keep a gun there for home defense. A gun safe is really just a time barrier. So if I had a vacation home that I only went to on the weekends, I could see a use case for a Biofire gun for me. I don't want someone breaking into my vacation home and stealing my gun and using it in a crime. I also think that some people want to buy this gun because, let's get real, it looks cool. I mean, I saw this design on the wall when I was talking to Brian, the lead designer, and the unit looks like it should be in that TV show, The Expanse. I would buy that gun just to have it because it looks cool and it's different. Now, if you live in the middle of Alaska and you're prepping for a worst case scenario, maybe this gun isn't for you. But for the use case of a home defense firearm where there's children in the house, I think this could be a good product. I also think that there are law enforcement applications for this platform. How many times have the police used deadly force because a suspect got hold of an officer's gun? In a case like this, they can take an officer's gun, but they're going to have to beat him to death with it. And any time a police shooting can be de-escalated into a lower continuum of force is a good thing, especially if it doesn't put officers at risk. Now, for something like this, Biofire is going to need to develop a fleet management application, and all officers will probably have to be registered on all of the department's guns in case of a worst-case scenario of picking up a fallen officer's gun and getting back into the fight. But in the software world, this is what we'd call a medium t-shirt problem. There's lots of fleet management software out there, so this is a problem that's been solved before. The hard problem is the unlocking of the platform, which certainly seems to have been solved by Biofire. Now, I just want to touch on some legal issues here. I interviewed Biofire's CEO, Kai Klopfer, and he said that Biofire does not advocate for laws that mandate smart gun ownership. Note that I'm not sure if mandatory smart gun ownership would pass constitutional muster. In the 2008 Heller decision, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the Supreme Court's Second Amendment protects arms in common use at the time for lawful purposes like self-defense, and arms that are typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. Of course, lack of constitutionality has never stopped a legislator with an agenda for proposing anything, so you might want to be diligent about expressing your opinion to your legislators to encourage the free market not the government to decide what kind of firearm you can own. Back in 1896, the same year that Alexander Winton founded the Winton Motor Company and horses were still pooping in cities all around the USA, Mauser came out with the Mauser C96, the broom handle Mauser. This semi-automatic pistol was held in such wide regard that British military officers purchased them personally, and people like Winston Churchill and Lawrence of Arabia personally carried them. Semi-automatic pistols have been around for 130 years, and they all operate pretty much the same way. Manual trigger, firing pin, recoil of the slide, loads the next round. We're in a world where I can magically look up all of human knowledge through a device that gets it through the thin air, but we're still shooting pistols that function the same way they did back when horses pooped all over the streets of our cities. So it might be time for some of those who fit the demographic of this product to consider entering the 21st century. One final thing. This was my first story ever as a journalist. I flew out to Biofire on my own dime. I paid for my own hotel, rental car, and food. I accepted nothing from Biofire while writing this. So I really appreciate everybody who joined my Substack and bought a t-shirt from Bunker Branding, because flying to Colorado over Easter weekend wasn't cheap. This work is my own opinion as a former military firearms instructor and as a software engineer. I would also like to thank Emmanuel Salabia of ABC News and Chuck Holton of Newsmax for teaching me how to be a journalist. Any mistakes I make are purely my own. And thank you so much for watching.
Hey everyone! New Ryan McBeth t-shirts and hoodies from Bunker Branding are available. I'm gonna get the HIMARS shirt. What are you gonna get, Donald? The Patriot shirt, because I'm a patriot. It's the best shirt, the biggest shirt. Make 14 tangos great again. What are you gonna get, Barack? Let me be clear. I'm gonna get a Drone Sweet Drone shirt. What about you, George?
I'm gonna get a Knife Hand shirt because they're weapons of mass destruction. What about you, Billy?
Oh, I'm going to get a landmine marker shirt because my presidency always blew up in my face.
I'll tell you what I'm going to get.
Ronald Reagan, but you're dead.
I came back to tell you that no matter our politics, we're all Americans. And we should buy Ryan's hoodies and t-shirts because they pay for the stock footage and licenses that allow him to make awesome content. So come on down to Bunker Branding and buy a Ryan McBeth t-shirt or I'll start the bombing in 5 minutes.